We're live.
Oh yeah,
We are live. Hey, today, yeah, it's an awesome song. Today we are joined by Tim Cox, who is the founder and principal of Zing PR, and he focuses on making startups famous in biotech, digital health, med tech, clean tech, life sciences, robotics, and AI. And we're just super excited to have you on the show today, Tim, and would love to hear what's on your mind.
Oh, well, thank you, Jeff, Eric, and Elena for inviting me, first of all. What's on my mind? Well, I was actually thinking about this question that might come up. And I thought, let me see what's in my inbox. And my inbox today had a lot of news about companies getting gigantic fundings in the biotech sector, which is like something we haven't seen for a while, maybe. All the doom and gloom we've been hearing about for the last, 12 months, 15 months or so. And as I dutifully do, being a PR person, of course, I went to each of these companies' websites and tried to figure out, who's doing their PR, because, and it was a mix, and what I did notice is that obviously the big guys have got big PR firms, and there are some fantastic PR firms out there in the big category. But what I've noticed is even smaller firms now are getting PR firms on board. And so the question that I was bouncing around is like, what is that kind of minimum funding amount where you feel we should get help here,
Well, actually, Tim, it's a great question. I would slightly rephrase it saying, what is the correct stage in the business life cycle?
Good one.
Where you get the PR firm?
Well, and I almost wonder, Elena, if people wait too long. Tim, you probably have an opinion on that too.
That's an easy setup for me.
Yes.
And what is too long, right? What is too long? When is that sweet spot, at least for the first engagement?
Well, I think the other thing that's really important to recognize, so Tim, we often talk a lot about in this group about how, essentially, in fact, this whole podcast started because of a conversation Eric and Elena and I were having about the fact that people hate marketing in startups because it's like they don't understand what it is, they think they need it, but then it seems like a real waste of time and money, and then the business development folks are like, what's that for, or whatever. And I actually think it's really interesting because I think you have to have a more subtle view of marketing versus PR. Like PR has a different role, and so maybe you could talk to a little bit about that.
All right. Okay. All right. Well, I'll tackle Elena's question first, and we'll get to us. They're connected, I think. I work with very early stage companies. That's been my thing for the last, 2 decades or so. I used to work in a big company. I've been in big companies. I've worked with big agencies. And when I left to do my own thing, I decided to focus on startups. It was at that time, actually, the whole .com boom, and it seemed like a good idea at the time. Unfortunately, then came the .com bust, but never mind. And I would say that you should start early. I mean, before you're doing funding rounds. I mean, I talk to people. In fact, some of my biggest successes, client successes in the sense it's been a great program for them, have been companies that have been super early stage, no Series A in place. They're maybe between kind of angel and seed funding, maybe seeds in place. They have now enough knowledge about their business strategy to really articulate that. And the question is, what are they going to announce? Because you're not announcing a funding round. So what do you pick? And that, I think, can be the challenge.
What about something like beta clients? If there is an interesting success on the beta clients, one could probably talk about that and sort of spin the company history and a little bit of a jazz to it.
Well, I'd love that. I would love if we could talk customers. That can be a struggle. I even go earlier in time from that. For example, recently I'm working with this company. They have a biosimilar product targeting insulin. And when I first started talking to them about 2 years ago, to the founder, who's a scientist, the question, one of his financial backers had said, you really ought to start doing some kind of PR. So we got talking. The question was, what are we going to announce? done. And what we arrived at in the end was we've reached a milestone here in the lab, right? Now to them, it didn't seem like a big deal, right? But when I kind of probed around it, it turned out it was kind of a big deal. It'd been like a 2-year project to get to that. And so I was, well, could we announce that? Could that be the focus of this announcement? Because if it's a milestone towards something great, let's do it. And so we did that, and turned out to be a good idea. Did a press release. We've got it in front of all these journalists. A few of them decided to pick up the story. A few stories got written, and that then led to a conversation with a research partner at Washington University who said, hey, we're working on something, so maybe we should get together. And so that got them through 2 years of research, a bit more funding, better lab space. So yeah, that's like a good example, I would say, of doing PR really when you're really quite in the earliest part of the evolution of the company.
In that early stage, what's a good pace? Like, are we talking about, like, once a week seems like too much. Once a month, I don't know, is that like also too much? Like, what's a good pace when you're that early?
I always encourage people to think about PR in terms of ongoing, right? That's how it works best. We're building relationships with journalists here. We're trying to build a presence online with these press releases going out the door and being indexed by Google. And that's all something you want to do, rinse and repeat. But budget, right? And that's the thing. I mean, a lot of these companies don't have much budget, and the idea of spending a few K a month on that versus lab equipment we need versus the website, and I'll say to them, your website's not there yet, we can't even really start to do PR until we've got that under control. So I'm actually very frequently, occasionally, certainly doing just project work just to get that. And it can't be, I'd like to feel that once someone's done a successful PR project, they think, let's do more of that. It was successful. But again, we're trying to figure out what do we have to work with in terms of legitimate news.
Tim, I want to butt in and kind of ask you a question very similar to that. What comes first? Does PR attract funding, or does funding then ask for PR?
See, we're on the same page, Elena. I was asking you the same.
In the chat.
Go ahead.
Well, I think that PR can attract funding. And the reason I say that, because I've seen it happen to a lot of my clients over the years, that has led to conversations with investors. But just thinking from a practical perspective here, if I was thinking of investing in this company, I think one of the dimensions to that, of course, is the science great, is other to the founding team look like they have the right attributes. The other thing I think is, can they tell their story? Are they, what's known about them already? The website might not be terrific, and that's often the case actually with early stage scientific companies. But if this company's already got out there, got a press release out there, have articulated their mission, their target customer, have already got some coverage, journalists have actually looked at this, written about it. I think, as an investor, these guys seem to be, they've got their act together, Well, so I think I would say that one begets the other in that sense.
And I think, it's interesting, and this I think, Tim, you and I may have talked about this a little bit when we first met, was this idea that you also need to think about, how do we prepare the battlefield, right? Like, what is the missing information out there that's going to stop somebody from funding you? I mean, I'm thinking like, Eric, in your world, like people are basically saying, oh, nobody is ever, everybody's talking about, I don't know, using machine learning and drug discovery, but nobody's ever actually built a model that does it. So with the fact that like you have models, you've built it, so you've built your platforms, you can run 100 models at a time, is an interesting piece of news that you might be able to sort of put out there and sort of be like, get people going, actually somebody has done this, so we maybe should stop saying that nobody's done this before. And those kinds of, I don't know, Tim, if you sort of come across that idea of like, what's the information that may be about sort of tangentially related to your project that needs to be out there so that your project gets, is well.
Okay. Yeah, I hear you. Yes. Well, I think in terms of stories for a journalist, right? So what I'm often looking for with clients is how do we situate what you're doing into bigger trends that we're seeing here? So in the case of our bio, insulin, well, there's been a lot of that on the news recently. In fact, even back then, 2 years ago, people were talking about the high price of insulin. And even back then, there was talk about maybe governments should regulate that. At that time, it was during COVID, there was discussion about the fact that the US was so dependent on pharmaceuticals manufactured abroad. And there's a supply chain, there's also security issue, national security issue. So that's what we then went for, right? We said, this is a company that wants to repatriate insulin manufacturing. It should be here. And not only that, enable developing nations to have their own capabilities to manufacture it at scale and expensively. So that was the hook, if you like.
Yep.
So as you think about that sort of battlefield, as you will, that landscape, maybe, then, well, that's it. It's finding something you can either ride on, hook onto, show where for an investor, that's clearly very important as well.
I'm going to take like a slight left turn here for just a second. Like a small aside is, actually, as you're talking about that, so one of the best PR programs that I worked on when I was at Cracker Barrel, the restaurant company, was we had a long-standing connection with country music and country music promotions, but there was a big conversation going on in the media about the fact that women were being underrepresented in country music. And so we built a program about, talking about how do we make sure women get enough representation and airtime in country music. And of course that got us on like the Today Show and all these kind of great things, because to the very point you're making is, if you can somehow connect your story to the story that the news is already talking about, it's like just a new angle for those journalists. I think it's a great point.
Great.
That's the sidebar, but yeah.
My next question is keying off of what you were just talking about, Tim, because there's two sides to this coin, right? There's the PR and the company side, but there's also the journalist side. And I imagine you've thought quite a lot about the psyche of these journalists. What do they need? What are they looking for? What gets the journalists excited? What gets them turned them off? What's the story there?
Well, I would say, thinking through if you put a journalist hat on, imagine you're a journalist, okay? And if we're talking about some of these sort of high velocity bloggers that, doing, 5-6 stories a day, they're looking for what's going to actually drive eyeballs and clicks on our platform. They're looking for, has this story been thought out for me a little bit? I mean, has this person done their research? Understand what I'm writing about, what interests me, first of all. Am I even the right person for this story? So there's that. But then I think as they open this email, what's going through their head is, first of all, is this an interesting subject line? So there's that, right? Subject line, crucial, thinking about these journalists with who knows how many pictures from people like me in the inbox just that morning, getting that click and that open. And then once that person opens it, does he or she look at it and read it and think, oh yeah, this is interesting. And I can see here that the elements of this story have been kind of thought out for me. The basic premise of this idea, the science that's involved, being told in a way that I can understand, the end target for this company, what they're actually trying to accomplish. Do they have available a scientist who I'll be able to quote in this thing? Is there research available? All the things that they need to kind of check off in their own mind need to be in that email. And so that's really, I think, the never-ending quest for the ultimate story pitch, right? It's that one that just lands at the right time in that journalist inbox, or that person clicks on it and goes, you know, maybe I'll give this person a go, you know, send an email back, and hopefully that's then the start of something. But I tell you what, I mean, I mean, I'm doing, you know, let's say for targeting 100 journalists, and maybe only half of them are going to open it in the first place. I'm sure a lot of people just doing like mass deletes. I mean, that was talked about in one of your earlier podcasts.
Yeah.
Right? People, they're pretty brutal these days, right?
Right?
You've got to be. I mean, otherwise, we've all seen it, right? You've been on a conference call with someone on their little sort of Macintosh dock is at the bottom. There's a little Gmail thing that's like, you know, 33,000 unopened emails, you know. I mean, I couldn't sleep if I knew that was happening to me. But that's the thing. It's got to be on target. It's got to be relevant. It's got to be inspiring, and they've got to feel that there's a story that can be written here. And that it's
and
not.
If it's not exciting the journalist, how is it going to excite the people who are going to pick up this, you know, read this story, for example?
That's right.
All right. Well, can I just throw in a slightly yet another left field subject? And given that we have a one founder here, Eric, who's a founder, right? I want to talk about founders. And having spent some time in startups, there is a lot of conversations about who do you PR? Do you PR the founder, or do you PR the business/product, right? So these are kind of two different conversations and audiences and stories. So I want to talk about that, like from your perspective. Like, should we start PRing Eric right about now? Like,
yeah. Well, think about what makes an interesting story. It's people. It's always people.
Right.
And so this is why, you know, doing product press releases often just don't get much love with journalists. It could be a fascinating piece of technology, right? But maybe there's no customer yet. That's a person, that's a hero in this story. If you're talking about launching a company, and I do that quite a lot, right? A company that's unheard of. Website went live 2 weeks ago. And I'm looking for, on that team, who have we got here who's going to make this interesting? And what's their personal story, right? And then we looked around on the recent launch I did, and it's like, well, the one of the primary.
Lost Tim. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely an interesting question, Elena, that you're asking with respect to founder versus.
Okay, back. I'm sorry.
Okay, so you froze on about the interesting story.
Right.
So we were like waiting.
What is that?
Yeah, we were waiting for that interesting story.
All right, I'll rewind. My point was that people make for interesting stories, and products not so much.
Right.
And so what I find is there's little appetite for product announcements with journalists. A lot more if you've got a focus for that story, be it a case study, a customer, a person that's using it, or what makes the founding team interesting. So why did this product come into being? What was their personal story that they decided, we want to do this, it's important, we can change things with this product, and what got them to that process? I mean, if I'm a journalist, again, that makes it something that I think my readers will find interesting. So does that answer your question there, Elena?
It's really interesting because I think as I think about sort of my career, which has been like basically entirely in food marketing, I mean, the same thing is true, right? We would roll out these, we'd put out a press release that a new flavor of Oreo or something came out, and generally speaking, that wasn't as exciting. Well, actually, I don't know, Elena, you were on Oreo, I think, when they launched like their first new product in like 15 years. So that probably got some.
What got some kick was when we launched the Golden. Remember the white cookie? That got some kick, but that's like.
Yeah, that was a long time ago.
Well, so I launched milk recently, non-dairy milk, right? Milk from bovine cell lines. And as I do a kind of a deep dive with my clients, have a whole discovery process I go through, trying to tease out these stories, trying to find, points that I think could be interesting when we go into outreach. And I think she said that something like, it's fine being a vegetarian if you don't like milk, or you can't drink milk for whatever reason, right? You're lactose intolerant, or you don't like animal cruelty, whatever that reason. But the problem is you really miss cheese. You really do.
Yeah.
Because vegan cheese, not there yet.
Not the same.
Not there yet. Said our non-dairy milk will taste like cheese, real cheese. Any cheese you want, just as like any cow, So it's like, that's a good angle, right?
I'm excited I want to read the article right now.
Well, I want to see if you guys did the research and if it truly did taste like cheese.
Well, I never tasted it, I have to say.
Hey, you had to.
I don't know if they were quite there at that point, Elena. They were like doing, lab stuff in a reactor, and they knew that what they were actually expressing was super close. I mean, to the actual animal protein, it was right there. So they felt it would have all of the attributes of real cow milk. Right. Well, it is real cow milk. It's from, it's from a cell line from a bovine mammary gland. So, so I kind of took them on their word there on that, I have to say. But they just got funded. That was
advertising, for example, than to hear about the bovine cell milk. Then what another thing I've heard about is cockroach milk. Apparently, that's
that's cockroach juice. I think it's like.
That's like actually milk from the cockroach. It's not like they grind up the bones.
Oh, no.
But okay, I have a right field, if you will, as opposed to left field question. The dark side of PR, which is, I don't mean like negative PR, but I mean like PR is also something that needs to be exercised when things go wrong as well. And
crisis management you're talking about, aren't you?
Having
well, I always say to my class,
my last job. Anyway, go ahead.
That one you had to be involved in that?
I actually I ran marketing at Cracker Barrel for a while and had PR, and I was on the crisis team, and we would, I don't know, the crazy crises that we would have to deal with, like I wouldn't go into, but yes, I'm sort of well aware. And actually, we had a really crack, PR team who knew when to shut up. And that is like sometimes the most important thing you can do in a PR crisis. But I'll let you talk about this.
No, I agree with that. I don't actually get involved in this too much, I have to say, because I'm working for startups, and they'll say, what about crisis management? I'll say, let's not have any crises. We're small enough, right, to avoid these.
It's either that or they have a crisis every day.
That's right. It's normal operating. Yeah.
Right. They're not huge public crises. Like you have to, people have to sort of know who you are to get really upset with you.
I think that's true. I mean, you can have your own kind of mini crisis, I suppose. Back when I was working in a larger company managing a software product, we had a crisis in that we had shipped a product with a bug in it. And we knew pretty quickly after it went out the door that QA hadn't caught it.
Right.
And so what do? We just said, hey, everyone, we shipped a product with a bug in it. We're really sorry. And we're going to ship a new product in about 2 weeks. Bear with us. We're really sorry.
Right.
And I think the fact that we went out there and we were very honest and kind of contrite about it, I think it just brought us a lot. In fact, we've got a lot of news from that, more PR, frankly, than the product launch. So,
right.
Yeah, someone was telling me a similar story where it was a security, internet security project, and they had a breach. And it's great PR when you're a security company, but that they did exactly what you said, as I understand it, was get in front of it, admit your mistakes, and talk about how you're fixing it, but don't try to pretend it didn't happen and
that's right,
make it worse.
Well, just recently we were talking, a client and I, about, they've got a certification for some advanced level of security. And we were all ready to go and do a press release about it. And then there was this gigantic problem in the healthcare sector, right, with change and what they've been through recently. So we decided, let's just table that for now.
Yes.
Don't necessarily want to put a big target on our back of saying, well, look at us over here. We're so secure and we've got everything locked down. And so picking your topics, I would say, is another thing to be careful of.
We certainly used to do that. We would run into problems where, like, if there'd be something going on in the news, or we had this moment where something bad had happened. I won't go into the details of it because it's not important, but something bad had happened to somebody in one of our stores, and we had a music related promotional program, and there was a growing sort of reaction to what had happened in this store situation. And we basically said, we're just going to table the music thing, because basically if we put out a music program, we're basically giving a platform for people to react to us and talk to us and whatever. But you're right. I mean, a lot of that crisis management stuff is like, how do you avoid making the problem worse? And we actually Bud Light was sort of a master class in what not to do.
Right. I remember that. But I actually do know someone who, if I did have a client with this problem, I would just call him, go and say, help us.
Right.
These are experts here that know exactly what to do and what not to do.
So what, if you sort of think back on, all of the projects you've done, like, is there some like sort of PR win that you've had where you're like, that was either unexpectedly awesome or expectedly awesome or whatever, but you're just like, this was just far beyond my expectations?
Well, I would just recently, actually, I mean, the project with our bio, super small company, right? But the editor at Wired magazine wanted to talk about it, and we did like an interview just to see if there was any there for her, and there was. And so they got a great feature story in Wired magazine, which is thinking now about a business publication with a science bent to it, read by investors, certainly, and one that has a gigantic circulation. It's a Condé Nast publication, after all. I mean, that was like a sort of I would say a real stretch goal. I mean, beyond a stretch goal, not even like ever likely to happen kind of goal. I've worked for clients for years and not seen them show up in Wired magazine. So it's just great timing. She knew the story about the insulin legislation.
So can I ask you another question? When success like this happens, you want to amplify it, and even like from simpler programs, you still want to amplify it. So given that a lot of startups are very active on social, social amplification, and what's the best way to handle it, right? Do you do like pre-PR social? As it goes on, you share? Do you do posts? Do you keep pushing it? Like, I've done it each and every way, and I think it's fairly situational what works best. But I would love to hear like what's the best practice?
Well, I think what we see on social media, is particularly corporate platforms, is a lot of people talking about themselves and their products and all the wonderful things that they've been doing. So less of that, right? I think the rule is like, 4-1-1 or something like that. I can't remember exactly, but the percentage should be, for every one post about yourself, it's like 4 about other unrelated to your business posts that are useful for your readers, or being useful. But with an example like Wired, that publication, that story that went out, what I would say is let's find ways to use excerpts from that story over the next few weeks. So not, because there's quotes that we can use from this thing. There are touch points in that story that we can make relevant to our readers. And so, yes, I think social media is a great way to amplify your PR, but don't be talking about yourself all the time, which is kind of strange for a PR person to be saying, of course, but there you go.
We've hit the half an hour point, so a great conversation. Thank you. Before we leave, we like to do a once around the room here, if you will, the virtual room. Tim, I'm going to start off with you. What's one thing you want to leave the audience with?
Well, I would say PR is part of marketing, to Jeff's earliest point there. It's part of that mix. Thinking about it in that quadrant of, paid, earned, shared, and owned media. And think about that mix as you're wondering how to allocate your resources to marketing.
Awesome.
Jeff, you want to go next?
Sure. Actually, before I go, Tim, just because I don't want to forget, what's the best way for people to reach you?
Certainly. It's tim@zingpr.com. Zingpr.com is the website, so there's a form there. I want to say LinkedIn is perfect.
That's ZINGPR.
That's right, ZINGPR.com. Tim Cox on LinkedIn. Always on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Don't I, Elena? You and I were right into a conversation today.
Yeah, that's awesome. I guess my takeaway today, I think sort of building on what Tim was sort of saying about PR being part of marketing, is I think it's not just that it's part of marketing, it is a very distinct role. And I think that sometimes in sort of the startup world, it's easy to sort of be like, oh, marketing, I don't know what that does for me. But it's like when you start to break marketing down into pieces, like, yes, but I need PR, or I need social, or I need, whatever. And I think you sort of having that in mind is really, really essential. Elena, I'll pass it to you.
Sure. It's interesting. I often look at things when it comes to marketing from very practical, commercial, product, where do we make money, where do we run kind of angle. So when you said to me, behind every boring product launch stands an interesting story, and there is a founder or a team member or a client or a situation, that was like, he's right. It was like, yeah, duh, it's true. That's what I like to read about. But for some reason, when it's my product, well, and it's a completely different thing, right? Baby. Everybody should be jumping for joy reading about it. But that was a very good kind of an aha reminder for me.
So for me, it was this concept of setting it up for the journalist, right? They just being aware that they have their needs, that they got to get those clicks, and just prep your story. And Tim, I imagine this is in large part what one of the major things you provide to those companies is like, how do I actually take this thing that you're saying and help you make it something you can sell? So
that's exactly it. Storytelling 101, really.
Yeah. Well, this was really fantastic. Thank you all for joining. I'm going to try what Dan told us last one and do an outro. But yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks.